survivors who are like, I was in an abusive relationship and I left. Do you want a balloon, girl? Like, what do you want? A gold star? A cookie? You a better victim than me? Welcome to Real Talk with Lisa Sonni, Relationships Uncensored. And today we are talking about how in the hell you could not know that you are being abused when you are in active abuse. And so today I have therapist Chelli Pumphrey with me to kind of take us through this insane way that we can't see something that's really happening right in front of us. So can you start with just telling us a little bit about you and then we'll get into it?
Yes. First of all, I'm so happy to be here. You know, I adore you. And these conversations about this are so important for us to keep having. I am a therapist, as you said. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Colorado in the US. And I have been a therapist for 30 years. I've always worked with intimate partner violence and got very specific in working with narcissistic abuse and pathological relationship recovery, I don't know, probably in the last 10 years. So my background is just working with a lot of trauma. I am also certified as a narcissistic abuse survivor treatment clinician, and I've worked closely with Sandra Brown. For those of you that might know her, she wrote the book Women Who Love Psychopaths and has done some work on this big thing that we're living with and dealing with every day. So that's a little bit about me just professionally, but part of this interest is because I have had many narcissists in my life, in my family and several partners. And I, as a therapist, could not believe I couldn't understand what was going on with me, because how is it that I could be doing this work and helping survivors every day? And yet I kept getting kind of bamboozled, we'll say, by these narcissists and not seeing it. So it took me on a long journey of really trying to uncover what was going on and why traditional kinds of ways of healing and looking at this weren't working for me and others.
Yeah, I find, understanding that you've been through it and then healing from it, there's just nothing harder. But I find it fascinating, despite having my own personal experience going through this and not knowing that it was abuse. Because something that I've noticed a lot since I became a coach and started working in this field is that people will say, if it was abuse, why didn't you just leave? Or if you knew it was abuse, go to therapy and try to work through it. And it's like you're expecting the victim to have the language to call it abuse, as well as the safety to even label it that way outwardly. But you want to call it abuse, know all the things, label it, when the whole thing is in an abusive relationship. You have no idea because you're being gaslit and cognitive dissonance and all the things. And it's wild, I think, from the outside looking in, like, how could you not have known? And to me, there's sort of two parts of this. There's psychological and emotional abuse, which is obvious only to experts, in my opinion. When you're in it, it's unbelievably hard to see. But then there's physical abuse that might not seem like abuse, which might sound crazy, but we're going to talk about all of that and why it might seem crazy. When you were experiencing it, because you were trained, I was not trained, do you feel like you knew faster or better than anybody else? Or what do you think?
When I think back through the history of it, I did not experience physical abuse. There was one relationship where I did towards the end, and that was kind of a tipping point. But it was mostly emotional and psychological abuse. And I knew that I felt horrible. I knew that I was being treated poorly, but the gaslighting was so severe, and the cognitive dissonance of questioning, is it me? Is it him? Is he abusive? Is he just being a normal person? It was so severe that I really didn't know. And that, I will say my first relationships, like long-term relationships that were with narcissists were, decades ago. And I've come a long way since then. So there was one in particular that I was in for a few years after a marriage, and it was very severe psychological and emotional abuse. And I was so confused, and I was afraid to tell my therapist friends. I knew that something was wrong. I started to suspect he was a narcissist, but I really was, he had done such a number on me that I thought I was the bad person. And so, and I will say, like, I thought I did all this, I dated, I just kept finding like narcissist or, kind of emotionally unavailable men, one after another. And then I did all this work. I stopped dating. I was like, I am figuring this out. I'm going to I did all this work on my attachment style and, thinking I'm getting it finally. And I just inadvertently, mistakenly met somebody, and he was a covert narcissist and seemed like the kindest, gentlest human being you could ever imagine. He checked all my boxes. He was the opposite of everybody that I had dated. Now, in retrospect, the red flags were there from the get-go, but they presented very differently. At least for my experience. Now I'm like, oh yeah, it's just textbooked, But it wasn't until I was further in and committed in this relationship that the mask fully came off with him. And I was like, oh my God, look at what's happened again. I was devastated. But it was still several years of a relationship, but I did finally leave. It was easier to see, but it taught me a lot about what I was missing. Like, for example, codependency is not the only answer. It doesn't fit really what's going on here. So I have a big beef with that.
Yeah, so do I actually. I feel the word is so overused. It's like, oh, you were stuck in an abusive relationship, you're codependent. It's just an automatic. And I'm not saying that's never there. I'm just saying it's not always there. That's not, these relationships have a way of creating dependency. Even if you look at the sheer way that a trauma bond forms, trust and dependency is built so early on that it's not just an automatic. But not knowing is baffling when you can start to see it like on the other side of it, when you're coming out and you look back. This thing that you're talking about with seeing the red flags, I used to say I didn't see any red flags, and then it all came out of nowhere. But as you learn more, you heal, you're like, oh, I saw the red flags, which I think is used against women. If you ever talk about, well, I did in hindsight see the red flags, it's like, well, Chelli, you stayed even though you saw the red flags.
Right.
You didn't see them. You see them now. I feel like that's the part we're missing, is you didn't see them the whole time. They were small and you rationalized them and they rationalized them. It made sense. Like, to me, it wasn't a red flag. That's not fair.
Right. Exactly. I agree. It drives me crazy with that kind of thinking. There's such an element of blame towards us. And, I don't want to get too far into all the nitty gritty, like kind of clinical aspects of that. But, what we know, or at least, what we're trying to help people understand is, there are things about us survivors that make us very vulnerable to these types of people. And it is the goodness in us. And codependency, we always think, oh, you just have no boundaries. You're just a woman who doesn't have a backbone or all this crap. And, I look at codependency as kind of this umbrella term that kind of explains some higher level behaviors. But if you do not go deep and look at the root causes of what's creating what looks like codependency, you're spinning your wheels. And there's an aspect of, it could be our personality traits. Like some of the research done by Sandra Brown and Purdue University is like people that, women that are victims of this often have an agreeable personality trait where we are kind, we're forgiving, we have empathy, we are optimistic, we want to see the best in people, and we will give 100 chances to somebody. And that is just hardwired into us. And that's a good thing to have in society. But when you are being manipulated by this abusive person, that is what they want. They want somebody who's going to turn the other way. And that's part of why we don't see red flags. Between that and then it could be trauma attached, like you've grown up with it, it's your norm, or it can be attachment related. And we just, I say we just bleach the red flags white. We see what we want to see, or we dismiss it, or we think, oh, that's just his trauma,
He's just angry.
No. Right.
Yeah, he was drunk. And honestly, when I think back, because to me, I'm in this little category of women who experienced severe physical abuse, but not constant. I just want to be clear. Yeah. Not that's me defending myself, I think. But we went from arguing and your everyday gaslighting and emotional abuse, which I didn't recognize as abuse, to in one argument, strangulation. Just like it absolutely shocked me. And I expected him to apologize, which I would have accepted, but he didn't apologize and instead blamed me for it, which was so his MO. But it was also like, I think it was an isolated incident. He was just angry. He just lost control for a minute. He'd never done it before. He never did it again. So it was relatively easy for me to go, well, it was just an isolated incident. And I felt that he was sorry despite not saying it, because who wouldn't be sorry, right? So it was like, he loves me. Of course he's
Right.
sorry. I moved on without the apology. Nothing else physical happened for 2 years. And then it got dangerously violent for a pretty extended, well, 8 to 10 months. It was pretty violent. And like, on one hand, like, dummy, I should have known, but I don't see myself that way. I felt that way in it. Like, how could I not have seen this? What's wrong with me? But I've studied now why I didn't see it. And that's the part. It's like, if somebody could have labeled it abuse, which nobody did in my life, maybe I would have seen it. But I also think that my cognitive dissonance would have prevented me from seeing that. Like, you just don't understand. He's traumatized. You don't get it. You don't understand him. But it's such an excuse. They're not doing this because they're angry. That's not why.
Exactly. No, not at all. And I agree. It's like, I think there's a lot of, so many people come to me, and I've had this experience with a therapist in the past where, people go and talk about it, but they often get, like therapists in particular don't label it as abuse, or we're trained not to be too directive, like not to say, don't, go leave this person, or this person's a narcissist. And I am like, no, that is not how you do therapy with this population. People need to understand who they're dealing with. And you also cannot just tell a person, just leave. I mean, I had a couples therapist that I was like, I don't even know why I'm coming to therapy, because I know I'm in an abusive relationship, but I was in severe cognitive dissonance at the time. And she literally emailed me and said, if you are in a domestic violence relationship, you should just leave. I was like, it just blew me away. It was like so lacking in empathy and depth. But how many people have that experience, or friends or family that are like, oh, you guys should just go to counseling, or, we don't get that validation. But then even when we do, like you said, we don't want to hear it. That cognitive dissonance puts us into kind of this state of denial. It's like Teflon, and everything's going to bounce off of us that might validate that we're being abused.
I think the truth is too hard. And there's an unconscious part of us that just like, that cannot be the reason. But that's part of it, right? What's going on inside of us. But I think what's never talked about, and I find it interesting that this is not talked about enough. It's only survivors that ever bring this up. How hard an abuser works to obscure the truth. How much they hide behind the covert behavior, all those insidious actions, the fact that they use plausible deniability to kind of survive and function and make you think you're the problem, make other people think, Chelli, I don't know, maybe he's just traumatized, or maybe you're overreacting. Are you sure it's abuse? Or maybe he's toxic. People in my life would say, like, I get that he's toxic, but insert excuse here. And it's like, he has strangled me while I'm 7 months pregnant, right? Like, you get that he's bashed my head in, and you're calling it toxic. So if I don't recognize it, it's no wonder even the people on the outside don't recognize it. Nobody saw it. And I'm the stupid one, apparently, but everyone else made excuses. So how was I supposed to know when he's actively obscuring the truth? How did you see that show up? Like, what has happened to you that made you not able to see it?
Well, I think, one person in particular that I was with, he also looked so good on the surface. I would say, like, he had this syrupy, sweet kind of demeanor where nobody would imagine that he was so cruel behind the scenes. And so that's also, what we often experience, like people, they are really charismatic or charming in public. And then people, are you sure? You can tell, like, you can just see people's wheels spinning when you're talking about it, because their experience is very different. And then they are like, you must be nuts. And so I think if you're really tuned in and sensitive, you're kind of reading that somebody is kind of say, like I don't know. For me, I'm like super sensitive in that way. And I'm like, I can tell that at least my perception is that they think I'm nuts.
Yeah. But that whole
Yeah.
like, really? Kevin? Oh my God, I've never had that experience with him.
Yes.
Listen,
Yes.
I know that's almost like part of the mask. It's part of the point. They play nice. One of the things that I wish that the world could just magically understand is that most abusive men are the nicest guy you'll ever meet. They're so nice. They're nice to everyone else. And the weirdest part is that they're nice to the victim as well. Obviously, not always, but the oscillation of kindness mixed with the abuse, which I realize creates the trauma bond, but also it makes you be like, but he's not all bad. He's 80% nice or whatever the percentage is. So you start to go, maybe that's trauma and maybe, I can tolerate this. Maybe he yells sometimes, but I mean, at the end of the day, he bought me flowers last week because he's telling you that too. Although I do kind of feel like they do nice things to earn the bad things. Do you know, it feels like a transaction. Like I took you to dinner last week, Chelli. You're still not over the fact that I cheated on you, but it makes you feel invalidated.
Yeah. Well, and that's like an example of what we call transactional empathy. So they are doing something nice and it looks like they have empathy for you, but there are always strings attached. And so sure enough, it's going to be held against you later on, but you're still confused because you're experiencing the nice thing. And yet, if you know the pattern, they will come back and hold it against you, or it doesn't even matter because it's not consistent. They could bring you flowers and then hit you 15 minutes later. So confusing.
It keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
It is. The most confusing part is that they aren't all bad. And I feel like that's when people say, okay, let's go back to this just leave thing. So you know that it's, let's call it bad, because maybe we don't know that it's abuse. You know that it's bad, so leave.
Right.
Okay, so you go to leave and he blocks the door, throws himself to the ground, begs you to not destroy the family, or guilts you or blames you, tells you you're ridiculous for how you feel. And you at one point loved this person or still feel like you do and you trust them. And you're not going to throw away a 20-year marriage, a 10-year relationship, whatever, because of a bad mood or because the guy has trauma. Everybody else abandoned him. You don't want to abandon him too. All people act like it's so easy to walk out the door, but you're choosing, okay, sometimes he's mean, sometimes he's nice. So you should end your relationship because of a little inconsistency. That's what you're being told.
Right.
Meanwhile, it's abuse. Society blames women for staying and yet blames women for leaving. It's such a icky double-edged sword.
It is. It is. I mean, we just can't win either way. And yeah, I agree. And that's where that empathy comes in. We have this empathy, we feel bad for them, but we've also been, our minds are just so destroyed because of all the dynamics, the gaslighting, the blaming, the lying, just we don't know which way is up. And there are also, we're talking about relationships, that are, it's common where we have the moments of good and then moments of abuse. And there are also people where, my jaw drops. Like there is never a moment of good stuff. Maybe in the very beginning when they were pulled into the relationship. But, there are some people, as you know, like who will, who have been, it's interesting. I was going to say who will stay. That's not accurate. Who have been coerced into this relationship and cannot leave because they're so terrorized. And even people will be like, well, why would you stay if he's a psychopath who's beating you every day? And, for anybody else, it might be an easy, like, duh, just leave. But no, not when you are completely terrorized or you're afraid to leave because you've been threatened, with your life or your kids or your money or your house. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
you can't just walk out the door. I wish
easy.
It isn't. And I think the people who think that, it's so easy to say on the outside. I think even you and I who've been through it and have all the empathy in the world, too much probably, I can understand the just leave. I shouldn't say just leave. I understand the idea that you should leave, I guess.
Yeah.
But when you're in it, you are not able to access all the parts of your brain that is logical and sort of just weighing the options. There's so much emotion and confusion. And it isn't a matter of like, girl, get unconfused. It's deeper than that. I mean, if you could just resolve cognitive dissonance in 2 seconds flat. I promise you, we would all do that very quickly. But there's a slow escalation of abuse. And then even when the abuse is present, because there's that oscillation of kind and mean, and every time you think, I can't take this for one more second, like survivors try to leave the average of 7 times, right? So if we're continuing to go back, it's like, what leads us back? I mean, and there's a million things, obviously, fear and money and children, all the things you said, but it's also just not even recognizing this. And the world is set up to convince women that this isn't abuse to begin with. We are so,
Right.
it's so true that we are damned if we do and damned if we don't. We want
Yeah.
so badly to believe that this person loves us, and they're telling us they do. That's the crazy part. They tell you,
Yeah.
I love you and I'm sorry and I'll change and I promise. Or they tell you that you're the problem. You're going to ruin a good relationship over absolutely nothing. And you feel like you're walking away from a lot. Like, women lose a lot
Exactly.
leaving in these relationships. People don't seem to want to
Yeah.
acknowledge that obvious thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's rare that a woman would come out on top of a divorce or a separation in one of these situations. And we have our court system, our society, it's a patriarchal society that has created this imbalance between men and women forever. And, there's so many layers that make it hard for us to leave. And, some of it is just the stuff that's in front of our face. Like, I won't be able to be with my kids 100% of the time, or I won't have enough money to afford my own house or something. But then it's these other parts of our system that we live in that are just so ingrained in our mind. And it just creates all these other hurdles for women in particular, and single mothers too, women of color. Like, there's so many different aspects of leaving that can be just incredibly hard. It's always important to recognize that when, I think the other thing that is really important for people to remember, and I know, like, I had this really bad in my most recent relationship, which was years ago at this point. But, when you have been severely abused or you've been in the relationship for a long time, essentially suffer brain damage. Our brain is completely off, like the part of our brain that is responsible for decision making, concentration, memory, and like higher level planning. And think about it, that's all the stuff that you need to be able to make a decision, strategize how to leave, how to figure out your life after you leave this person. That is offline. You are, you're kind of living in this state of fight, flight, or freeze when you are you're experiencing chronic trauma or stress. And people are like, I've just felt like a zombie. I didn't know which way was up, and then to have to figure out, like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do with my kids? Like, it's impossible. So for people that are, stuck in that, just understand that that's also, like, there are physical reasons why it is also so hard for you to figure this out and leave.
Yeah. Just even, you know what? Even if we separate that to figure this out and then leave as a totally separate step, even to know that
Yes.
it's abuse, the denial, and it could be denial, it could be betrayal blindness, it could be cognitive dissonance, or a nice little cocktail of all of these things together. But you don't even know, because every time you might say and even for the people who are maybe watching YouTube videos and social media and reading books, and you're starting to be like, that's gaslighting and that's emotional abuse. If you start to label it, I remember once saying to my partner, this feels so abusive. And it was the only time I ever used that word. And to be fair, even as I said it, I don't think I actually recognized it as abuse, which is crazy. But I didn't. But I remember him like, what? Don't be ridiculous. You're so ridiculous. But actually, abusiveness is a pattern of more than 2 instances of this type of bad behavior, which emotional abuse, verbal abuse, psychological abuse. If he's calling you names, that's abusive. So it's like, well, maybe he's just toxic.
Yeah.
That's abusive. We need to stop downgrading it. How people know that they're being abused is more women like us talking about it and exposing what this is so that people have the language and the tools. In fact, I wrote a book, Narcissism Unmasked, because I wanted people to have all the terms, all the tactics. It's got over 125 of them all listed in there so that people can go, okay, I get what's happening. and watch all the videos and YouTube content you can to learn. Because as soon as you start to realize and let that education, let that clarity in, you start to be like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem to be changing. I want people to realize there's a pattern. And if it continues to happen, like, for example, if you are crying, tears are coming out of your eyeballs, he can see that. You are crying in his face. So he knows that you're upset, angry, sad, distressed, brokenhearted. So if it continues, it's on purpose.
Yes.
It's a little oversimplified, but it's on purpose.
But yeah, at the same time, it is, sometimes I'm like, it is that simple. Like, you can see these signs, again, looking back in retrospect, or for working with it so much, like for you and I can spot it in a few minutes when somebody's telling me a story. And I mean, that's just because I listen to it all day long, but these are the little things that, along with the big things like being strangled. But
yes,
we overthink it, or, each little, I always call it death by 1,000 paper cuts. And it is like every little paper cut, you think, oh, it's just a paper cut. It's painful, but it's just a paper cut. I'm not going to die from it. But every paper cut is a cut, and you have to recognize it as that.
Yeah.
And we just don't.
Is too many. It's
right.
I would have called being strangled a paper cut in that sense, because I just saw it as like one other argument. And yeah, okay, that one went a little bit far. Never mind the fact that you're like 750 times more likely to be unalived when you're being strangled. But it's like it didn't register. But if somebody told me they got strangled, I would be like, girl, do you realize that's abuse and you need to leave? And oh my God. But when it was my partner, you don't understand. He was just angry, and he's got all this childhood trauma that you don't know about. You just, you don't understand. I love him and he loves me. But meanwhile, love and abuse don't coexist. I have a very firm belief that he doesn't love you. It's not possible, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, somebody without empathy is incapable of love.
You need empathy for that. I completely agree.
I mean, how can you feel love if you don't feel the depth of emotion or that, I don't know. To me, love and empathy just go hand in hand. But these people don't have empathy.
I've heard that if they have a little, they use it for themselves. I'm like, fair enough. I know most don't have it at all, but they're a challenging group of people to be in a relationship with. Talk about an understatement.
That is,
but it is hard. I want people to be more educated, to learn more about toxic relationships and abusive relationships, and really learn about what the differences are. Because I think one way that I see women start to come out of that fog is to start to be able to label things and really start naming what's happening. Because once you start to see the patterns, I'm telling you, it unravels from there, and you really start to see the abuse, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help that the world still has these garbage opinions, in my opinion.
Right.
And that actually leads me to this section of the podcast called Real Talk from the comment section. So I'm going to read you a couple of comments that people have left on my page. And let's see what you think of these comments, because these are the attitudes that are everywhere, right? Other people see these comments too. So here's the first one. Maybe she didn't know it was abuse because it's not abuse. You females will call anything you don't like abuse. The word has absolutely no meaning. What's your thought?
I want to laugh and scream at the same time.
Right?
I mean,
scream too.
It's such a representation of what's happening. Like what you just said, like our society, and I will say, like this patriarchal society that does not look at the inequality and imbalance for women and anybody that is basically not a white, wealthy, or white upper class man, that, it's not abuse. Like, we're going to take away your right to even identify what you are experiencing. Like, that is the ultimate gaslighting right there. Like, you can't even say it's abuse because that doesn't even exist. Oh, okay. Right.
I know, right? It's it's maddening.
What shall I call this? Yeah.
Right? Oh, he's just mean. It's like, and I'm very into labels. I think that the more we can label something, I know people don't fit into the perfect boxes and there might be multi-labels, but labeling it abuse, the word does have meaning, and men repeating it has no meaning, or this isn't in the comment that this guy left, but I see this sort of like anytime a man says no to a woman, she screams abuse. That's garbage. That's what men want you to think. When she said no, you mean like she said no to sex and you kept pushing? That is abuse, actually. But anyway, we'll move to the next comment. Women only call it abuse after the relationship is over. Ever notice that? So he leaves you and poof, he was abusive. If he was actually abusive, she would leave. Stop acting like y'all can't just leave.
Well, I think that kind of just goes right back to the entire conversation we just had about why we can't just leave. And again, not under, clearly somebody who has no idea of how these relationships happen, how difficult it is for somebody to leave when they're being abused, and, just such judgment. What I wish is that people could just be curious and if somebody says they've been harmed, why would you automatically assume they're lying? Why do we not listen to victims? Why do we not trust women or children or anybody that is coming out and saying, I was harmed? Why is it that they're the ones that have to build the case to make everybody try to believe them? It's insane that we live in a world like that.
It absolutely is.
You're getting
My
me all
theory
riled
is
up
that,
now.
trust me, I know. I think, though, that men like these two men, they probably benefit from this system. I mean, every man benefits from the patriarchy, but the one where we silence victims of abuse specifically. My money is usually on they are abusive themselves and they've been called abusive and they're just trying to sort of put it out into the world that women can't say that. If he was abusive, she would leave. And meanwhile, that's the same guy that's standing in the doorway being like, please don't leave me, or you're not going anywhere, scarily in the doorway. She can't.
Yep.
It isn't that, and there's a million reasons. I mean, they're not always blocking you, but they get you to block yourself, in all honesty. But there's so much more to it. It's deeper than these idiots seem to think. And I'm definitely, there's their label, idiot, for sure. Now, my last comment that I want to read to you, it's not from a man. So, you stayed with him for years. If he was really abusive, you would have left. People don't stay where they're actually being harmed.
Well, I think we've already answered that in the last half hour or so. And, I think it is important to know that women hold these attitudes too. And really, when I take a step back and look systemically, we are all victims of a really messed up system. We have all been indoctrinated with all this bullshit, basically. And when a woman in particular is adopting those kinds of viewpoints, I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm going to go out on a limb here for a sec and imagine that she has been raised either by a family or has also been in a relationship where she has been gaslit and taught these kinds of concepts her entire life. And it's it's like when I say this with tenderness toward this woman and even to these two men. The best example is when we are in a cult and we are brainwashed and we do not know that what we're being told is wrong. But you have a group of people who are also brainwashed and you feel like collectively this must be the truth. And you have no idea that you're in a cult and somebody's manipulating you. It's like they're just talking the messages of the cult or the group or the system or the patriarchy that has told them this is the truth. And that's why we have to be curious. We have to be open. We have to listen to survivors and understand their experiences. So important.
It is. I don't know, I was going to say I don't know why, but I guess I do know why. But it is so much more heartbreaking to me when I see these comments from women, especially survivors who are like, I was in an abusive relationship and I left. Do you want a balloon, girl? What do you want? A gold star? A cookie? You a better victim than me because I'm stupid and I stayed? Do you not realize how much the shame that you are projecting onto me would keep me and or people who are reading this comment in an abusive relationship? Shame is brutal. And here we are shaming people on the internet, making them feel bad. And it's one thing to make fun of somebody, which is horrible, for staying in an abusive relationship or not knowing that it was abuse, but to sort of put yourself in a more superior position of well, I left. You're not me. You don't have my life experience. Maybe yours wasn't as covert. Maybe you had more resources. Maybe he was more violent more quickly. There's just so many hypotheticals. But why we do that to each other, it's mind-blowing. I want women to stick together, lift each other up so that we can recognize abuse and feel that we can see it and then use what we see and take action. But shame is not going to help that. And these men that say these comments, you females, right?
Right. Well,
and see it immediately.
I think the thing that I think of, this might feel a little, I don't know, harsh, but, often people that really hold those beliefs, if they haven't been indoctrinated in that way, they also could have personality disorders themselves. Those can be the narcissists, the sociopaths that are just, that have no empathy and hold those beliefs. And they're also indoctrinated in this system that has taught us this. But because of the lack of empathy, they can sit there and say things like that and shame people. Like, to me, that's, I kind of think if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Like, there are certain types of people that feel okay with doing that kind of stuff. And that's what we're trying to heal from.
Yeah. I always it's a little sarcastic, but I'm like, that could never be me online, shaming survivors of abuse and
Right.
shaming people for anything that they're going through. You picked it. And it's I always find it wild from men, because men are the first ones that will scream like, nobody believes men when we're abused. Nobody believes victims. It's not about being a man. You think people believe women?
Right.
They always say, a woman just cries abuse and everybody believes her. Who are these people? It's
Since
very rare,
when?
actually. Since when are women believed?
I think it's
literally
a
laugh
lot
out
of
loud.
examples.
Yeah. Let me go find a comment section filled with people who believe women, who are not also a survivor themselves, because that's a little bit different.
Exactly.
But the world doesn't. All of this, friends and families and therapists and pastors, and there's so much pressure on women to be loyal and to be forgiving and all of this. And it leads us to not recognize it. It leads us to not know that it's happening. And even if you can kind of start to come out of the fog, people are just trying to confuse you more, some unknowingly and some knowingly. But people who are abusive really benefit from keeping this going and keeping victims from even being able to see it. So I think that conversations like this are just so wildly important. Is there anything that you would say to sort of like a collective, like all survivors who are maybe not in that place now where they know it's abuse yet? They're in that maybe he's just mean stage. What would you say?
If somebody's listening to this, you're in the stage of discovery. And we all have been through that stage. We live in a time where we can go on Google or the social media or whatever and start looking at, usually the first thing people Google is like, is my partner a narcissist? Or my partner did this? Or like, keep doing it. Like Lisa, like you said, like labels are important. Education is important because it will help you feel less crazy. And I will tell you, in my experience, like I often burst out laughing. I'm not in a mean way, but like when my clients are telling me stories about, my partner did this or this. And I am like, it's literally like they have all gone to the same school and followed the exact same like formula of how to like entice a person into this relationship and abuse them. And even though the details are different for every relationship, the patterns are so strongly like the same all across the board. So that's why it's important to keep researching, find a coach, find a therapist that understands this. If you are with somebody, a therapist or a coach or somebody that's like giving you information that makes you feel worse or ashamed or telling you to just leave, don't work with them. There are a lot of people who do not understand this. I highly recommend working with people who are survivors themselves because it is such a unique kind of abuse that, we do get it. But survivors who have training to be able to help, like Lisa, me, others in this field that are trying to help you see the light.
Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, it's such a good message. There's hope. You can learn, you can break, you can move on. We just need more empowerment, more education, less shame, less men on the internet saying this nonsense, and less patriarchy all around, all around. Thank you so much for being here. It's such a good conversation. I hope everyone listening, took something from this and just feels really validated.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for the work you're doing and your courage and just speaking out about this. I'm just grateful to have people like you in the world to keep spreading the message here.